Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Modern Life. This is Sam, and today I am joined by both Tabby and Stacy, and we're going to be talking about two movies, Ford v Ferrari, which just came out last year, and then also the movie Rush from 2013. We're going to talk about the movies, also comparing them a little bit. And without further ado, let's just dive right into it.
The closer you are to death, the more alive you feel.
You're James, aren't you?
Yes. Who's that?
It's Nicky Lauda. He's just been signed by Ferrari.
He's a nobody.
Look at the way he's driving, like an old man.
Right now, with zero incentive, why would I drive fast?
Because I'm asking you to.
All right, so usually we do some modern thoughts, talk about some stuff that's on our mind, but since we do have two whole movies to get to, I think we're deciding to just skip that and dive right in.
All right, so we're starting off with kind of getting into more Ford versus Ferrari.
Yeah, let's start with that.
It's about the 1966 Le Mans race. It came out, as you said, 2019 and was directed by James Mangold. And it kind of tells the story of Ford finally winning that race that year and the trials and tribulations that they had to go through and the cars they had to build to achieve that.
Right. I saw this movie in the theater when it came out, and the first thing I noticed watching it at home for the first time, it was one of those movies where I had a really different experience watching it at home compared to the theater. Like, sometimes it really matters where you watch the movie, and sometimes it really doesn't, but I remember in the theater, I was just the sound of the cars, like, to me, it was spectacular, and it kind of was part of what made that movie for me, and for whatever reason, it didn't quite translate at home as much, and I kind of really felt that missing from the movie. It just wasn't coming through the sound bar like I wanted it to.
Did you have that same experience, Stacey?
Yeah.
That's really tough with these types of movies where, and this did win for sound editing at the Oscars.
Right.
And I actually really loved it, and I probably would have loved it even more in the theater. I really loved the sounds and the sound of the cars that they found and recorded for it, and I thought that Oscar was very well deserved.
So we're going to be talking about Ford vs. Ferrari and Rush, and I don't want to start comparing the two already, but the only real quick thing I will say for now is that when we watched Rush a couple days later, I didn't have that same problem. I feel like the sound in that movie it just translated better for like a home system. I don't know why, but we can get to that later.
No, I agree. Yeah, we can jump back and forth between the two. While we're already on the Oscars, I think we were all shocked that Christian Bale wasn't nominated for this as supporting actor. Especially who won? Brad Pitt won, which is fine, but you compare that to what Christian Bale does in this movie, and it's just like...
That seemed like a pity Oscar for Pitt, right? He's like, oh, this guy's maybe overdue, let's give it to him. Like, seeing it again at home, I had such a different experience from the movie theater, and I liked Christian Bale when I saw it the first time, but I liked him so much better watching it at home. Like, there's certain things...
Well, I think that you focus more in on the acting when you're at home versus like when you're in the theater, you have all the sounds like going and you're just like, you're kind of wrapped into the movie a little bit more versus when you're home, like you can really like focus, you end up more focusing on what's being said and how people are delivering it and things like that. I see what you're saying. Like I definitely saw nuances in his acting that I didn't see while watching the film in the theater. And his transformation that he makes, like with all of his roles, but especially in this one, just the little like tiny gestures he makes with his body, like physically, to like be able to capture it was phenomenal.
I would just imagine he would have back pain after.
Oh my gosh! Like just the rolling over of the shoulders and just
really
simple like
over.
Body gestures that he made throughout when going back and like watching how the real guy was.
Ken Miles.
Yeah, Ken Miles. It was just phenomenal how he took on the twitches.
Right. So they show a picture of Ken Miles at the end of the movie, and I feel like Matt Damon doesn't really look like Carroll Shelby that much, but Christian Bale really looks like Ken Miles. That was just kind of my take.
Well, that's the thing that really stood out to me in this is what Christian Bale was acting circles around Matt Damon, and I don't think they were well matched.
Well, this morning I walked in on you listening to an interview.
So I remember listening to this interview with Matt Damon a little while ago, and I had to re-look it up because I didn't entirely remember the whole thing. On the podcast / it's sort of like a show now, off camera with, I think Sam Smith is his name. He did an interview, I want to say it was the early part of last year. Matt Damon's talking about being on the movie set for the first time in 2 years, and he's describing the movie. He's like, I'm wearing a cowboy hat, and I'm wearing these jeans and boots, and we're filming on this raceway. And then Sam Smith was like, oh, is this for the Ford Ferrari movie that's coming out? Matt Damon's like, yeah. And Matt Damon goes on to talk about how he took a 2-year hiatus because his dad died. He was in the hospital with his dad. And then after that, the whole family took like a year-long trip to Australia, apparently. I think he was really close to his dad from what I got in the interview. And it made so much sense because Matt Damon's, it seems like he hasn't acted in 2 years in this movie. He seems just kind of rusty. And I think we all know Matt Damon is a phenomenal actor, but you can tell in this movie, he's like, he just seems kind of like stale bread a little bit.
Well, doesn't he even like state that he didn't feel like the character? Like he had such like a hard time,
right,
like becoming the character because Shelby was such a charismatic salesperson. Like everything he said was like gold coming out of his mouth. And then he said he was going through like such emotional turmoil at the time that like he had a really hard time trying to grasp onto that and like become the character, which he's never really had a problem doing in the past. But because of just where he was coming out of this 2-year like hiatus and just everything that was going on with his dad, that he like really had a hard time grasping that like charisma.
The first day of filming, and he's wearing these cowboy boots he hasn't broken in, and he's wearing these jeans he hasn't broken in, and his cowboy hat's not comfortable. Like, and then later in the interview, he goes on to talk about how he usually is so prepared for his roles that he's not surprised by anything come day one of filming, and it just didn't seem like maybe he was that prepared for this movie, or just diving into acting after 2 years again. Like you can just tell it just wasn't up to par with Christian Bale.
And I actually also think that Christian Bale had the better character to portray.
Right.
I found this really great article by Hannah Elliott where the article is called Ford versus Ferrari depicts a generation of car guys that's best left behind. And we've talked about this on the podcast before and how biopics depict certain aspects of people and what is our responsibility in labeling these people as heroes when they maybe weren't people we would admire or look up to. That was the car culture at the time, like super macho male. There's no women in this movie. And she's saying that it's a little bit grating for her because the car companies are still like that today. It's one of the industries that's very far behind in equal gender representation. And then also what you found out about Carroll Shelby is like when he died, he was on his 7th divorce. He mistreated the people around him. He had a lack of loyalty because he would like sue people that he worked with. He was named as creating like a sexually hostile work environment. He was like a big game hunter in Africa, killing all these like animals.
Right.
And her quote on it I really liked. It was, Ford versus Ferrari puts in stark relief the stunted mentality of previous generations. Carroll Shelby, crystallized by Hollywood like a mosquito in amber, is its totem artifact of generations dead and gone. For those who are serious about making brilliant, thrilling, innovative vehicles in the modern age, he's best left behind. I just thought that was a really cool sentence, and whether you agree with it or not, I just think that, yeah, Matt Damon had the character who was a little bit more of like a, do we really want to find out more about this character who was kind of a jerk the whole time, and they had to change him a lot for the movie to make him more likable for the audience. Whereas Christian Bale's character dies pretty soon after the race, like 6 months after. I think that's one of my problems with
the movie is that it takes a lot of liberties, and it's very much, if you make a word out of it, Hollywoodized.
Oh, right? Super Hollywoodized.
Where I actually wouldn't have minded if Matt Damon's character is a little bit more true to form, right? And kind of this, because Carroll Shelby was supposed to be like master salesman and loudmouth, and you don't really get that from Matt Damon's character. I'm not saying it's his fault; it's just the way the character's written, right?
Well, they not only did that to him, but they also did it. They villainized other characters in it that weren't actually as villainized
right. So that's
as
the
they.
thing. So they toned
like
down
Piba,
Shelby.
I think his name is
the BB.
BB.
One of the execs at Ford, who's kind of the villain in the movie. From everything I've read, the guy wasn't like nearly as bad as what it's made out to be in the movie.
But do you need that in a movie? Do you need to make like a
I was thinking about
villain?
that. I don't think you do, because we'll get to Rush.
And it doesn't do that.
There isn't really like a
Yeah.
villain. I don't really think you need that, because you have the fact that the sport itself is so high stakes. Like, I don't think you need then also like a villain on top of that, because these stories these movies tell are... They're insane in their own right, and I don't think you need to then like have a villain on top of it. It's just like so old school Hollywood, and especially in this age where every TV show the star is basically an anti-hero, right? I don't think you need to have Shelby be this nice guy. I think it's okay if he's kind of an asshole, right?
Yeah, it kind of
because Ken Miles is really a likable character. Like, you don't need to have Shelby be the likable character.
Yeah, I agree, and I think they did a better job in Rush with that, where they like showed that Hunt was like such a womanizer.
And Niki Lauda's an asshole.
And Niki Lauda's a complete other asshole. And you still like their characters, but you like see their flaws as well. And I think you can do that.
Well, I think that brings me to my next point, is that this movie is 2.5 hours. It's too long. It's too long. I got impatient. There's things that I wanted to just cut out. This movie does not need to be 2.5 hours. If you just leave out maybe the villain or some of the other scenes. Like the airplane scene. Why do I need to see this? What is going on? Like, we've already established so many things about this character. I don't need to also see like, oh, he can fly and is kind of reckless. Like, I already know that watching the movie.
He's going to this car show, and he's like, oh, let me take over the airplane. He's with the Ford execs, and he's like making a whole stunt out of it.
And he didn't do that in real life, too. Like, I fact-checked that. It didn't
Me too,
happen.
Yeah. It's just another one of those things where I get him. Then by the end of the movie, when things happen, I get impatient with them.
Right.
You know, because I'm like just ready for it to be over. And Rush is only 2 hours long.
Yeah, and just, I don't know, coming back to the Ford versus Ferrari takes so many more liberties than Rush does. That whole story of Ford versus Ferrari in the 60s, it's so iconic, and it kind of wrapping up with Ken Miles' death at the end, spoiler alert. I just think there's so much meat on the bone there. I don't think you need to then have... I think he could have focused in more just on Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby's relationship. I don't think you need all these other Ford executives that can just kind of be in the background, and the whole conflict can just be that, okay, Ken Miles didn't get to race like that first time around, right? Like, Ford didn't want him to be one of the drivers. Like, there's already enough kind of struggle in the story, and like his relationship with his wife, you know, Ken Miles. Like, I just seems so unnecessary to have this super comically evil Ford exec in the background. Just seems a little silly.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to the factory scene in the beginning, which is probably my least favorite scene. So old man Ford is in his factory. He stops everything, and he's yelling at these like middle class workers who are just putting the cars together. That he needs them to come up with an idea, even though he has this whole marketing team. Because at first I'm watching the movie and I'm confused. I'm like, oh, was this before they had like a separate marketing thing and a separate, you know, is this maybe like in an early age of car production?
Ford.
And then I thought, oh, okay, so maybe this means that one of the factory workers will come up to Ford with like a great idea. This is what it's setting up. That never happens. It's just a whole scene of like, look at us hiring all these extras in this factory that we made. And I'm like, I don't need to see it. It's pointless.
It's basically, Ford is somewhat on the decline. They're getting their butt kicked by Chevy.
And GM.
Ferrari's dominating the racing scene. And yeah, the exec comes up. He's like, we're getting our butts kicked, and you guys all need to go home, and I'm firing everybody unless someone comes up with a good idea. And I didn't find any evidence that happened in real life.
It didn't happen in real life. It wouldn't have happened. They wrote like a couple articles about that. He would never. I mean, there was so many scenes where they showed him like interacting in the movie that would never have occurred. Like, he never would have gotten into a car unchecked and like did that whole driving scene.
It's a great scene.
It's a great scene, but it's not factual. It wouldn't happen in reality.
And I don't need everything to be factual. Like, not everything in Rush is factual, but it needs to make sense in the movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And this was a scene that just didn't.
It didn't
it
lead
served
anywhere.
nothing. Yeah. Exactly.
You could have totally skipped that whole scene, and you could have
given me more of an explanation of what's going on.
Yes. So right after that scene, shortly after, you see them all. What's his name? The guy's always
Bernthal. John Bernthal.
John Bernthal. We love John Bernthal, but he is always being John Bernthal in every movie. He's giving this presentation to all the Ford execs shortly after the scene in the warehouse, and I feel like you could have just introduced all the whole Ford executive team. You could have just introduced me to them in that scene of Bernthal giving the meeting. Because you could have done all your exposition right there. You could have just given this PowerPoint or slideshow of just, here's our sales, and Chevy's kicking our butt, and I have this great idea that we should, spend more money on our racing team, and blah, blah, blah. You can set the whole thing up right there. It's just so pointless to have this scene in the warehouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also just, either the exposition's bad or I just don't know enough about this. We had to keep pausing because I didn't know about Ford and Chevy having this rivalry. I didn't know what Le Mans was. I didn't know where the other two drivers, if there's three drivers. Like, we had to keep stopping because I didn't understand what was happening. Which is interesting if it's such a niche movie for, like, driving fans, but then it gets nominated for Best Picture.
Well, it was like number one at the bottom. I mean, it was a huge
I don't
movie,
know.
did really well.
So maybe this is just me not understanding.
No, I think it has to do with like where you were born versus, because I didn't know anything about, like, when we went to watch like the Rush and like all that stuff. I didn't know anything about that European
F1.
racing. Like, I didn't know anything about F1, so I was a little confused by all of that. I grew up with like NASCAR and like more of this kind of scene, so I knew about a lot of the Ford versus Chevy and things like that. I never questioned any of it watching it, but when I was watching Rush, it was like, okay, what's going on? Like, but they do a better job in Rush of like explaining things.
Well, it's also,
but still, like,
F1's
it was definitely
simpler.
a lack
Yeah,
of
you just
knowledge.
go in a circle.
Le Mans and everything leading up to Le Mans, you do races, and this is shown in the movie before Le Mans to kind of test out everything. It has nothing to do with Le Mans, whereas in F1, it's almost like its own league.
And also, now that you brought that up, I'm curious to see if Ford versus Ferrari didn't do as well as it did in the US because other countries aren't as familiar with
Maybe
Ford and Chevy and this whole...
Probably not, yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
No,
I didn't look that up. I think the biggest flaw in the movie is that it doesn't explain Le Mans very well at all. And if I know a little bit about it, so I was fine, but I was thinking both times watching it, if I didn't know anything about how kind of this racing works, I feel like I would be really lost. And you seem to be pretty lost watching it with you, Tabby. And kind of for people who don't know, Le Mans is this crazy race. It goes on for 24 hours. In this instance, Ford submitted like 8 teams, and I think there were 6, but there's different it gets super complicated because there's different classes of cars, but like there's the 3 main racing teams, right? So all 3 cars finish at the same time. That was that iconic moment that happened in real life. Now, 2 of those cars were actually under the Shelby racing team, right? Which is never shown in the movie. You think just Shelby has like just Ken Miles with like 1 car. Shelby actually was in charge of 2 teams, and then the 3rd car was part of a different Ford team that crossed. Also, Le Mans, you have, because it's such a long race, you have 3 drivers. What I didn't know is that actually didn't start happening until I think 1980 or in the 80s. Before that, which is during this movie because it's in the 60s, you only had 2 drivers per team, which is insane.
Wait, I thought
to
it
me.
was 3 drivers. They kept saying 3 drivers?
I looked at the results, and there's only 2 drivers listed as per car if you look at the results through history. So the movie doesn't really explain you how Le Mans works out well, and then also I don't think it really shows that grueling aspect of race car drive. Like, and maybe some people don't grasp, but like how you have to drive for 12 hours, like at 200 miles an hour. It's insanely grueling on your body. Like, if the movie could have jumped into that a little more.
Yeah,
I definitely could have felt like they did a poor job of like going into how hard it was. How hard that.
Yeah,
that
I mean,
it just.
it's an insane race, especially back then with only 2 drivers. I mean,
I can barely imagine like truck drivers going all night, and they're not going at like these insane
Yeah, they're not experiencing the
speeds.
G-forces.
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely grueling on your body. Just in F1 alone, you didn't believe me this, the F1 drivers lose, what was it, like 20 to 30 pounds per race just from all the water their body loses. I mean, racing is crazy on your body, and this movie doesn't totally jump into that. I just think it could have explained a little bit more about how the racing actually works. You know, if when you see, wait, why is there 3 Ford cars crossing the line? I thought there was only like one driver taking shift. Like, I just...
Okay, so each car has then 2 drivers. And
Each
there's
car
3
in this instance, from what I can
cars.
tell,
Okay.
had 2 drivers. Yeah.
Got it.
And they're all separate teams, technically, right?
Something I did really like seeing in the movie was the pit stops. They took 67 seconds back in the day. I was like, what's happening? Are they stopping? And you were like, no, that's how long pit stops were.
Pit stops, yeah.
Back in the
When you
day.
look at pit stops now, it's like a second, 2 seconds long.
It's 2 seconds,
crazy.
yeah.
But
Well, I think that's also engineering too. Like the cars have improved so much. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they had to like redesign like an entire brake, like the entire brake system.
Cars
to
have
be,
improved, the tools you use,
Yeah.
right? Like now you can refuel a race car in like 2 seconds. Just, I mean, you see these giant hoses they attach to the car, and then just the amount of pressure the fuel is
Yeah,
dumping
because in
there.
the old school video that I looked up on YouTube, you just have a canister and they're pouring
Yeah,
it in. So
yeah.
there's no pressure forcing it in.
And in this one, they have pressure, but if you... And it's a pretty big hose if you see it, but it's nothing like the technology they have now. And if you look at, you know, not Le Mans, but if you look at something like F1, I'm pretty sure you get like 1 fuel tank per... Like, you don't even refuel anymore with certain races. So you're really just changing the tires at that point.
Because they're
which is
so
why
energy efficient now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that, and it has to do with, you know, they have to... Certain regulations and cutting... You can only use so much gas with global warming and everything. Like, they're trying to also comply to that.
Another thing I wanted to say about Christian Bale that I forgot to say before is he has oil under his fingernails and in the creases of his hands that will never come out. You know this because your dad is a mechanic. Like you can wash your hands all day, it won't come out. And I thought that was such a cool little detail for Christian Bale's character to have. Like you believe him completely that he's this car guy. And then the next scene I actually had a question about. There is a scene of Christian Bale fixing cars and he's listening to the radio. He's in the hangar and then his wife comes in and they're like drinking beers. I think this is when he's left behind.
Yeah, it's the first year where he was supposed to race and then gets left behind.
He is listening to the radio and I could not hear anything on the radio. And I asked you two, what is the radio saying? And you guys said, I can't hear anything. Was this audible in the movie theater?
I remember hearing it in the movie theater.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
interesting.
clearly remember you can kind of tell what's going on in the race.
Oh, it was about the race.
Oh, the whole thing. He was listening to the race.
Yeah, he's just,
I didn't hear any. Maybe there's something wrong with our speakers because I was
he's
like,
listening to the race that he wasn't able then to go to.
Yeah.
got it. Great.
No, but again, so there's something that just didn't translate from the movie theater sound to our sound here at home as much as it does with other movies. So I don't know how that all works. But
Well, was Rush supposed, when it came out, I know this is a small fact, but I'm just curious, was Rush supposed to be like a blockbuster or was it
Yeah, it
released
was in the
more, was it
theaters,
released as
yeah.
like a blockbuster?
it's like a semi-blockbuster.
I mean,
it's like a
'cause, like-
Ron Howard movie.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm just asking, like, because like Ford versus Ferrari, like, I mean, it was supposed
I don't think
to
it
be,
has the budget of a Ford Ferrari, but
That's
it's
what
like
I'm
a
asking.
I'm
wondering-
blockbuster.
I don't know, I'm just wondering if when they made that movie, if they made it more for, because you know some movies are made to like be played on your TV, you know what I
Sure.
mean, versus some movies that are like literally they never are going to be the same on your
Right,
screen as they
right.
are like in the movie theater. Just wondering if there was a difference in like how they filmed those two movies based on like what types of movies they were.
I don't know.
Well, but what I find interesting is, to me, Rush is a better looking movie than Ford versus Ferrari. Or just as good. And it doesn't have the
Right.
budget. It doesn't get nominated for any Oscars. I don't know. Do you think it's that much different? Do you look at Ford versus Ferrari and you're like, oh wow, this is so many years later? And to me,
Ford Ferrari definitely has just... It's got that it factor of like a big Hollywood movie where it just has a certain look, like a certain kind of polish to it, if that makes sense. I think both movies look great, but...
I think Ron Howard just really worked with what he had and made
Well,
it.
Ron Howard's also like...
Yeah.
he's a really seasoned guy.
Yeah.
So,
It's just interesting comparing what each person did with.
I wish that I could have seen Rush in the movie theater because I didn't. So I have no comparison in the big theater versus like on screen, home video. I think it may have come across different. It might have seen
there
different
was
colors. It
something-
may have been different sounds that I noticed that I won't be able to compare
There was
right now.
something about seeing Ford Ferrari in the theater that just really worked. I mean, as far as the sound, for sure, but just seeing, like, there's something about seeing two really good actors across on the screen, on, like, a big screen, like, in that setting. Like, there's a little bit of that movie magic that happens. Like, Christian Bale, Matt Damon. You almost get mesmerized by that a little bit. It's just, to me, it was a whole different experience in the theater. To where Rush has, in 2013... Chris Hemsworth is just coming up, right? He's not that big of a star yet. And
Daniel Brühl.
they're both amazing, but
They haven't hit
I
their
think
peak
part
yet.
of that movie magic is it. I know you guys don't care about this movie. When you see like the movie Heat and you see De Niro across from Pacino, like there's something about two seasoned great actors like on the big screen together that's like part of that movie magic. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a really interesting fact. So in 1969, Jackie Ickx, I don't know how to say that name, he walked to his car instead of running. We see that scene in the movie. You don't start out in your car, you have to run
In Le
towards
Mans,
your
you
car.
gotta run to the car. Yeah.
So he was last to start, but he was first to finish, and it was his personal protest. And you see this in the movie. Christian Bale's helmet gets stuck on the door gets bent, and he cannot close the door in the first lap.
Yeah.
This is a time in racing. We see this in Rush again. Everybody's constantly dying. People wouldn't put on their safety, anything, their seatbelts, nothing, because you're just trying to run out of there. And shortly after that, they did change that regulation so that you would be safely in your car instead of running towards your car and then not getting strapped in.
Racing has gotten crazy safe. There was like a dozen race car drivers that used to die every year. It doesn't happen anymore.
More than that in some of those races.
Yeah.
I think they said that the year that Rush year, there was like 50 racers that died in F1.
Which also makes it part of the whole 60s, 70s, 80s. It's just these glory, like race car drivers, I think more than now, are just such larger than life figures.
Oh, yeah, they're maniacs.
Because it's such a dangerous job. And also, I mean, it's the same that happens with Hollywood stars. There's just less big race car. Now there's so many different types. You have motorcycle racing and you have rallycross. There's so many racers, where back then there's not that many racers. It's a really dangerous job. So it's like, there are these like astronauts, but they drive cars instead of spaceships, right? Like they're these larger than life figures.
I wanted to say something also about the costumes. In Ford versus Ferrari, we get that 60s, like, really great suit textures, the skinny...
Powder blue, you like that?
Yeah, I love the skinny ties. Everybody's got the skinny
great.
ties. And then when we go into Rush in the 70s, it's always fun to me. Like, even if it's like a parody and it's Austin Powers, I think those decades are just always such fun to look at. And, they got the white pants. And so it's again, something that makes both of these movies just fun to look at. For me, is the costumes.
Can we talk about the wife in Ford Ferrari?
Oh, she's my favorite.
She kind of makes the movie for me.
You were joking about, like, I'm here to audition for female. the one female.
I play wife number one. She really balances the movie out. She's like this voice of reason. And she's really well written.
Oh, yeah.
For a character that's not in the movie that much, she has such an impact, especially on the Ken Miles character. That whole scene where they're getting groceries, and then she's mad at him, and she starts speeding through the country road, and he's like, "What are you doing?" Like, he's the race car driver, and he's like telling her to slow down, and she's just like, "You have to talk to me, like we're married, basically." You know? Like, oh, it's so great. Like, Ken Miles is just, he's kind of a little whacked out of his mind.
I kind of feel like that's why you like Ken Miles more. Like, I feel like without her role, you wouldn't like his character as much.
Yeah.
And I feel like she's the reason you like him so much, because he kind of comes off like a dick too. And she kind of like, in the background, is like, what
Which to me
softens
is why
him.
you didn't need to then kind of make Carol Shelby's character so nice, because you already have a really nice character in the movie, right?
Yeah.
You have that pure character. You don't need to have Carol Shelby be like, That good old all-American boy. Like, nobody cares.
Yeah, she's great.
I think she's my favorite in the movie. She's just great. Like, when the two boys are fighting, she, like, pulls up the lawn chair. Like,
That's actually the next scene that I was gonna say something about. Because this movie gave me really mixed signals on making a statement about macho culture. And that scene does such a great job of it. Because they're fighting, but they're just rolling around the grass.
yeah,
like
wrestling.
they're
all
idiots.
friends, yeah.
And I thought that was such a phenomenal scene. But then you have other scenes like with Ford, where he compares his little car races to his dad's experiences in World War II.
Right.
And I'm like, not the same. And it's just also something that like these macho guys do of like comparing all their struggles to like a war or conflict or
No, but that's their motivation. I don't know.
no. I'm fine with showing that. It's just in those scenes, the movies made it look like, look how cool this guy is, instead of framing it in a way that passes judgment on it. Yet in scenes like the wrestling scene, it clearly is like, well, this is ridiculous.
Right.
And the
I see
movie
what
just
you're
gave me
saying.
like really mixed signals of like, am I supposed to find this cool or am I supposed to find this like outdated? And
So when Ford gives Shelby the whole speech of, we
It's
used to
like-
make
yeah.
World War II bombers here, and like this is not the first time we've been at war.
it's like, this is not
like,
a
is it
World
supposed
War
to be
II.
inspiring, or is it supposed to be
Right.
slightly parody? I see what
Right.
you're
So
saying.
I always thought that was like more of a parody.
Oh, really? I
Yeah.
don't think it's how it's supposed to be.
Well,
Well,
I just
I
think
think-
I felt like that was just a part of like his representation of the role, because Ford was obsessed. From what I had read, he was obsessed with his grandfather, and like
Right.
how in
Makes
comparison and things like that. So I think they did I think that was needed to show who he was as a person, and I get a very Trump vibe from him. Like,
Right, but I think just the fact that we are confused about it sort of means that the movie is a little flip-floppy at times. Like the scene in the grass, we're not confused about that.
Right.
We're supposed to laugh at that. And your what you just said is completely valid. So the fact that we're all taking away like different things from it is kind of like,
I don't know. I feel like that happens in every movie. Like, you bring your own experiences in,
Yeah,
and then
no,
you
for
take from
sure.
it what you want.
but if I then compare that to Chris Hemsworth's character, we're not supposed to think that the way he treats Olivia Wilde is in any way acceptable.
Right.
Right? That movie
Sure.
knows what kind of who it's portraying. And I felt like Ford versus Ferrari was kind of stuck sometimes between that idolizing these people, but then also trying to say something true about them and
Right.
being trying to do too many things again.
That makes more sense to me. Like, kind of trying to balance it out, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes, yeah.
So a few things. The scene where Damon and Bale roll around in the grass, I somehow missed this in the movie theater. There's a really quick shot of, I think, Christian Bale, Ken Miles. He's like trying to reach for a weapon in the grocery bag, and he like picks up
The Wonder Bread?
canned beans.
Oh, the beans.
And then he drops and picks up the Wonder Bread and starts hitting Matt Damon.
Yeah.
I didn't see like him almost reaching for the beans when I first watched it, which I thought was such a great detail of like, oh wait, actually, I don't want to like hurt this guy. We're just wrestling around. He starts hitting him with like a soft bag of bread.
That was a great scene.
And then the other thing, just to kind of come back on what you said, it is weird how it does, the movie romanticizes certain parts of the story, but to me overall, like Ford as a whole actually looks really bad in this movie, right? It looks like just Ford is just all these
Infighting,
incompetent
yeah.
execs who are all kind of infighting, and
Enzo gets one up on him right in the beginning
like
of the
Ford,
movie.
Ford actually looks really bad in this movie. Like they're just always kind of in the way. From everything I've read, that wasn't entirely the case. I know there was like micromanaging going on, but not to that extent.
Yeah, they weren't really as against Miles as the movie portrays.
But I think it's just weird because it's this iconic story of Ford in the 60s.
Right, and the movie is called Ford
but
versus
then
Ferrari.
Ford actually looks really bad in the
Yeah,
movie.
it's-
Obviously, the movie ends up being not really about Ford at all. It's about Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles.
Mm-hmm.
To where you walk away from the movie and go, like, Ford looks really bad here.
Cut half an hour of this movie, tighten it.
Yeah.
The only last thing I had to say about this was this movie winning for editing.
Yeah, I thought the editing was in Rush was actually insane. Rewatching it for the first time in a while, the editing of just how these cuts, they're all separate cuts, but they flow together really well to where it'll show the race car approaching, and you're kind of on the apex where it's like striped red and white, middle of the corner. You'll see that approaching, and then the second the car goes by, you see the shot going the other way, and you just see all these leaves blowing, like to kind of show you all the
leaves,
speed.
yeah.
And then it goes right into the cockpit, and like the shifting gears right to the driver's face, but it all kind of makes it look like one shot. And like I thought the editing was really well done in the race cars.
Honestly,
there.
let's get into Rush because
the only other thing I wanted to say about Ford Ferrari before we get into Rush is at the beginning you said like, is this is something that's better left behind, right? These stories of these macho guys and this.
I see, yeah. What the
The only thing I would have to say about that is I get where that's coming from, but it's such a great story. Like, where's that balance of telling the story, even when the people in that story, or like Carol Shelby, are not like the greatest people?
Yeah,
like,
and
don't
I think
you still need to tell that story?
I think Rush did that so well, and I think that's just what I had a little bit of problems with Ford versus Ferrari, was trying to.
Because you can, I guess,
but like we said, it takes liberties.
You can still glorify the story without glorifying the people in it.
Yes, they should have had you as a consultant on Ford versus Ferrari.
Well, which again brings me back to the point: they don't have any problem making Ford look bad, but Carol Shelby has to be kind of like the hero in the story, right?
Yeah.
Which again is kind of like you can make people not look like. And we'll get into Rush. Well, you can look like an asshole and still be the hero in the story, right? That's okay.
When we were watching Rush, and maybe it is the editing, my heartbeat was up watching the racing scenes, and they weren't when I was watching. But maybe they would have been if I had seen it in the movie theater. So
that's the first thing I noticed, because Rush starts right with the racing, and I guess Ford Ferrari sort of does too. But in Rush, you really feel the speed of these cars. It does a really good job showing that, and doesn't do that good of a job showing it in Ford Ferrari. It's not, there isn't as much detail about the cars. There's all these great shots, how it goes like on the inside of the engine in Rush, right? You see like the pistons, there's these, it really focuses in on the cars a lot. And then it's constantly showing you how fast these cars are, because it'll have these shots of the cameras really low to the ground and the cars going right by the camera, and then all these leaves flying. Like, you just feel how fast these cars are. It does a really good job of that.
So just a really quick summary. Rush, directed by Ron Howard, came out in 2013, and it takes place around 1970s and tells the story of the rivalry between Hunt, who is played by Chris Hemsworth, and then Niki Lauda, who used to be an F1 racer, and he is played by Daniel Brühl,
who just died last year, I think.
And we had a modern thought about it.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
I think, though, it was helpful in those scenes to have an actual racer be so in part of making the movie.
Totally, I was going to get to that.
Niki Lauda was there through the entire making of Rush, and was like watched it and like helped like Daniel. How do you say his last name again? I'm not even gonna try. I'm gonna refer to him as Daniel. He like spent so much time with Niki Lauda, like learning his like all of his little intricacies, and I think that really plays up in the movie, because they don't think they had that with Ford versus Ferrari. Like, I didn't hear anything about
the interview you listened to where Lauda is like talking about meeting with the scriptwriter.
Well, what Stacy just said is, when Niki Lauda asked Daniel Brühl, what are you most scared of doing this movie? Daniel Brühl said, well, you being alive, obviously.
Yeah.
You're here to like judge me, and I have to be like exactly like you. And what Niki Lauda said in the interview, the script would say like, you put your keys in the car and drive away, and he's like, there are no keys, there's only a button.
You put your seatbelt on, you turn the key, and you go off in the car. Yeah.
And Niki Lauda's like, no, that's not how cars work. So
it's not how these race cars work. It's like, he's like, I can't even put my own seatbelt on. Someone has to do that for me. Like, all these great little details and insight you get from him telling his own story. And
you can research, but it's different when you've experienced it, because you know how it feels, and it's easier for you to help someone replicate it if you can give them those details and like the feelings. And I think you get that with Rush a lot, and that's why you get so like amped up during the scenes, like the racing scenes, is because it's told from a racer's perspective versus with Ford versus Ferrari, it was like it wasn't from a racer's perspective.
It was more of a biopic.
Yes,
like,
exactly. And it's completely different perspective that you're seeing the movie from.
Right, but then you also, I mean, it helps if someone like Laura give you those details, because I mean, script writers they're focusing in on writing the story and the characters, and then these details get missed. And when you have, especially someone like Lauda, who's very straightforward and he's going to tell you what's on his mind, and he's like hounding you about getting these details right. Because what didn't he like tell the guy? He goes, if he's like, you have to share with me if I'm going to share with you. And he makes the script writer like read the script to him. I just wonder, without Lauda being there, does Rush, because Rush doesn't take a lot of liberties, and it's very,
I think the biggest liberty,
accurate.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate with almost all scenes except for like Niki Lauda and James Hunt were actually like friends, which the movie didn't show that they were that they even knew each other previous. Like,
right.
I just
you gotta set.
But that was like the only big liberty. Other than that, like most of the scenes, I think the only other liberty was they added in that whole scene with the reporter that didn't actually happen.
Right.
I don't like that scene.
Hemsworth beats up the reporter.
Yeah, I mean,
I like that scene because it shows
that was the scene that made the friendship real to me.
Right.
There could have been a way to do that without the violence. I don't know.
So Niki Lauda has his first press conference after being back from the hospital, and the reporter asks him a super rude question. Then Hunt, after the press conference, like beats the crap out of the reporter. I don't know. I guess you don't have to have the violence. I like it because it cements, okay, Hunt cares about him too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean?
And I it didn't seem unfitting that Hunt would do something like that. Like it didn't seem out of character for me for him to just lose his temper. So it worked for me, but I know it didn't work for you. But you don't like that masculine.
Well, I don't know. I just, from watching interviews with Hunt, like, yeah, he was kind of a womanizer and doing drugs, but I don't know if he was violent and I don't know. But going back to what Stacey said, that the movie takes a few liberties. Niki Lauda said that he really loved the ending of the movie where he says like, oh, I wasn't surprised when he died. I was just really sad. And he thought that really summed up that they had this really great friendship, and then it evolved into this rivalry, and then it just ended in friendship again. And he really loved the ending of the movie.
Yeah.
Who's saying like he needs Hunt. He needs that enemy he needs a guy so he can push himself, right? I love the intro. I love a lot of things about Rush. I don't know if you noticed in the intro, there's all these different languages being spoken, like over kind of a radio voice filter. Mm-hmm. And it's just all these voices talking about the condition of the race, because the big thing was that it was just raining like crazy, which is, part of the reason why Niki Lauda ended up crashing his car that day. It's just one of these details that kind of gets missed if you don't really pay attention. I thought that was kind of nice. It's all these different languages talking about how wet the race is, right? Mm-hmm.
By the time he crashed, it had dried mostly, but there was still a wet patch, and he messed up. He hit it, and his car spun out of control.
Well, they actually don't know exactly what happened because he has no memory of the accident at all.
I'm sure.
But that's what they think happened. And they also said that something could have happened to I forget what it's called, but
something in the car.
Yeah, something in the car broke too, but they don't have any proof.
Even if it has nothing to do with the track being wet directly, it's also affected by the fact that he had to change his tires from wet to dry. They took a while in the pit stop, and then he's driving like a maniac trying to catch up.
Yes.
So it all ends up going back to that it was so wet.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the crash?
Yeah, sure.
The scene in the movie is I know he's gonna live, but I'm still just oh my god.
In the whole movie, just constantly
Next scene.
Well, I mean, it was so dead on, except there was 4 people in the movie helping him to get out. In reality, there was only one person.
I did look that up. So that's something that I tried to also look up in Ford versus Ferrari, because you see people crashing there and everybody just keeps driving. Mm-hmm. And then there was that really horrible accident in 55 where 80 spectators died and there's dead bodies lying around. Everybody just keeps driving. But here, so you have one guy trying to flag down drivers, and Arturo Merzario stopped and he could have kept driving. He got out of his car. There was one guy trying to hose the car down so the flames would stop.
I think that was Watson. I think that's actually the person that was holding him when the
and 2 people were holding Arturo Merzario while he's trying not to fall into the flames, get Niki Lauda out. By the time Niki Lauda finally passes out, they're able to get him out because his body's completely relaxed and they couldn't get him out of the...
he didn't, at least what I read was that he was still awake the entire time because he was talking to Watson as his head was in his lap afterwards, where they're waiting for the people to
there
come
was
back.
one person who resuscitated him.
Yeah.
And that person, if they hadn't resuscitated him, Niki Lauda would have ended up in a coma. So he goes unconscious. They finally are able to get him out. And Arturo Merzario says this physically just shouldn't be able to work because he is a tiny little guy. He's pulling this dead weight out of a car and he's like, it's just pure adrenaline at this point. Totally. I'm like reaching into the flames. So they pull his helmet off, which makes all the skin like rip off of his like head. And then the person who resuscitates him was like, it was really important in getting him back conscious.
Yeah, I guess he was like asking him like, how bad is my burn? And he like had to tell him like, don't worry about it, it's fine. Like, to try and like make him stay calm so he'll stay awake and not freak out and like go into panic.
Yeah.
So what you said where like in Le Mans, there's instances of all these people dying and the race just kind of goes on, and with Ferrari, right, like this guy gets out of his car, stops the race, helps Nick Lauda out. I think because
it's endurance race?
No, I think what it is more from everything I can tell, because F1 is like its own little thing and these guys race together with each other all year, there's much more of a sense of community. To where in Le Mans, you have all these different racers, and they might see each other, at different races throughout the year, but they're not like traveling around the world together, partaking in all these races. I think you really get, as much as these guys are competing with each other, there's definitely that sense of community that
you get that with like, you can see it from James Hunt, like in the very beginning of the movie when somebody died, and you can like see him watching it. And he like, you can feel the like him like being physically upset about it. You know what I mean? So you definitely get that sense that there's more of a community there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the movie does a great job of illustrating that this was a time when people just died all the time. The guy's asking him for the date on the autograph in case he dies. So when Niki Lauda's in the hospital, he remembers having this really great feeling and going into this black hole. He had to pull himself out of that, and he thinks that that's when he was about to die. And he's like, no, I have to listen to the nurses and the doctors. And there's that famous scene of the priest that happened in real life where the priest is giving him his final rites, and he's like, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
And when
I'm still alive, fuck you.
And then when the wife comes into the room, this is a really great movie scene where she just sits down next to him when he looks so terrible and she's holding his hand.
In reality, she fainted, right?
Yeah, I would have fainted too. I would have been like, oh my God.
They make him look somewhat good in the movie with all the scars, I feel like still. If you look at some of the real life pictures of him race, like I feel like he actually aged better with it, but those first few years after he has all those burns on his face, like it looks pretty brutal. And like half his hair is like on here.
Yeah.
And
Well, that red hat he always wears ends up becoming like a huge source of income for him, because he would put like different motor things on the thing and they would pay him to wear it because it was...
Yeah, he was always wearing a hat. This movie has some really funny scenes. That's something... Like Ford Ferrari... There's a couple endearing scenes, but there's a couple scenes here where just laugh out loud funny.
It's
like
so
good. When their car breaks down and the two Italian guys,
oh god, that was
like
great.
Pick them up.
That whole scene.
Oh my god!
From beginning to so many things happen in the scene. We get introduced to the wife. We know why they're attracted to one another. We get that Niki Lauda's becoming famous because the two Italian guys recognize him. We see him being good with cars because he knows the car is about to break down. We see him driving a car. Like, so many things happen to illustrate character in that one scene.
Yeah, it's a big scene.
It's brilliant.
And then it's funny on top of it because the two Italian guys are just freaking out.
Yeah, they're like, Niki Lauda!
Oh my god, it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's great. That scene is a really well-written scene.
And it wasn't a true scene. Like, it was added in for effect, but it was perfectly done. It summed up like a huge period in very little time.
There's a scene when Niki Lauda first test drive the Ferrari car after he gets signed by the team, and he's like, this car's a piece of shit, and the guy's like, you can't say that. He's like mocking the guy. Oh my god, like there's some really...
The line at the end where Chris Hemsworth is like, you're the only guy whose face gets burned off and it's an improvement. Such a great line.
Like, to me, this movie has much more, I'm going to call it like emotional dynamics compared to Ford Ferrari. there's these really low lows and these really high highs, to where Ford and Ferrari, it's a little bit more evened out. It's not quite as dramatic of a swing, right? You have these really funny scenes followed by Niki Lauda getting his face burned off, followed by, a great racing scene. Someone gets first place, followed by Chris Hemsworth getting like divorced. Mm-hmm. It's just going all over the place. Mm-hmm. And it really kind of, for me, it really works because you just kind of, especially for the characters, you get the bond with them more.
Well, and they introduce the characters right away in a way that I'm like, oh, I get these two people.
Right.
Because one guy's very methodical, like, oh, he's been on the track the whole morning, he's checking everything out. The other guy shows up like on drugs, and then the way they race, Chris Hemsworth is like a total shark, and Niki Lauda falls for it, and like right away I'm like, oh, okay, I get who these characters are and how they drive. And
there's not a lot of fat in the movie. A little bit that could even be cut is like in the beginning when Chris Hemsworth walks into the hospital and then he starts hooking up with the nurse. Like that
worst nurse ever.
It doesn't need to be a 5-minute scene.
No,
you can just kind of show that he's going to hook up with the nurse, and we kind of get that this is who this character is.
I noticed that this time around too, that scene just kept going on, and I didn't remember it going on for so long.
And then all of a sudden he's getting the award for like driver of the year, and he's got a new girlfriend. You're like, wait, what happened to the?
Why did we spend so much time with the
other
other
one?
What was the point of that? I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of stuff like that could have maybe be left on the cutting room floor, but overall it's a really tight movie, and a lot of the exposition happens like naturally.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I want to talk about Niki Lauda's dad in this movie.
Okay.
Who, first of all, great that they actually got somebody who's with an Austrian accent to play the dad. And I think the dad is like shown as such a jerk. But think about it. You come from like an educated, pretty wealthy family, and your idiot son comes up to you and is like, I'm going to be a race car driver where I'm probably going to die. It just kind of shows the dad being... It's supposed to show that Niki Lauda is self-made, but at the same time, I'm like, did they have to show the dad to be so mean? Like, I don't know if that scene works for me, because... It's really such an idiotic proposal for Niki Lauda to make to his dad.
I don't know if the dad comes off mean. Dad's just putting his foot down what he's standing for. I don't see the dad coming off as a jerk.
I wasn't sure about that, so
like I put myself in the shoes of that dad, and this is like your last stand trying to convince your son not to do this stupid thing. Right?
Yeah, like, and he's not going to give him any money to do it either. You know what I mean?
Like, from what Niki Lauda said, I guess he broke off like all contact with his family for a while because he just, every time he would talk to them, it just kept being an argument of why is he racing? He's like, I don't need this in my life right now. I'm trying to make this work. And it shows him, so he takes out a loan and he basically buys his way into F1. And when I researched him is, like, it shows that he's self-made, but it's actually, he bought his way in twice. And what I mean by that is, so he does that initial thing where he buys his way into the team, and he races both F2 and F1 for them for a couple years. And then that team's not doing so well. He actually took out another loan and bought his way into another team.
Oh, wow.
That second time around, that's when he meets the other driver, who then... That driver gets signed by Ferrari, and he's so impressed with Niki Lauda, and he tells Enzo Ferrari about it, and then Enzo Ferrari hires Niki Lauda. So he took out a loan twice to be able to keep racing in F1, which is just a crazy risk. The loan was like collateraled with his life insurance. Like, if he doesn't make it, like, he's screwed. And then the other crazy thing is, I was looking through his driving history. So he races, I forget, 3 or 4 years he races with these other teams that he bought his way into before he makes it to Ferrari. If you look at his wins, or for your wins you get points up to, like, I forget, 10th or 15th place. I think after that you don't even get points if you even just finish the race in F1. He had 0 points the first 2 years, and then the second team he buys his way into, he only... From what I can tell, the car breaks down a bunch because he doesn't finish any of these races. He only finishes a few of them that year. He only has 2 points for the whole year. And then he gets signed by Ferrari the next... Like, this guy doesn't have a good racing history, but apparently he's so impressive setting up the cars that the driver he's with, like wants him to be on the Ferrari team with him.
Wow.
Which is really crazy when he doesn't have like a successful racing career and then gets signed by Ferrari because of it. From what it sounds like, he really gets signed by Ferrari because he's so good and so knowledgeable with the cars. And he goes from having 2 points with the team before, I think it was 4th overall with Ferrari his like first year, and then he gets first place like the second year, which shows you the car is just as important as the driver, right? I can't think of anyone else who would go from being kind of a nobody racer to Ferrari is like it's
Right.
It's still a really good team now. I think now you have other teams like Red Bull that are really good, but especially Ferrari back then in F1, I mean, it is like the team to be on. It's the creme of the crop. And this guy goes from having 2 points all year to then going to drive for Ferrari, which is absolutely crazy. Just kind of shows the type of guy he is, I think.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the wedding scenes, because I think this movie does a really great job of never losing its vision of putting these two characters next to each other. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff happening. There's races, there's the crash, but it always kind of comes back to these two characters and how to contrast them. So we have, Chris Hemsworth having this elaborate wedding and everybody's there. And then a few scenes later, you have, Niki Lauda giving that great speech to his wife, and they're like getting married in secret. And
just at the courthouse, right?
Yeah, and I don't know. It was just one of those things where I'm like, oh, this movie it balances it so well to show us each of the characters in different ways. So let's get to Niki Lauda, or Daniel Brühl playing Niki Lauda, and his accent. Oh, yeah. I think it is one of the greatest accomplishments, honestly. These American actors can't even get one accent right. Here's Daniel Brühl doing an Austrian accent and doing an impression of Niki Lauda in German, in English, and probably also in Italian.
I didn't think about that.
It is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And while wearing prosthetics in his mouth that make him look
if you look at the
like
pictures,
Niki Lauda,
especially of the real Niki Lauda at that age, like at the younger age, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart.
Yeah.
Like, they look identical. I mean,
so does James Hunt and
Chris Hemsworth?
Yeah.
They look very similar, too.
Yeah.
And actually, I didn't realize this originally,
it's not as much
but
of a transformation for Hemsworth, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's not. But what I was surprised and shocked about was when I heard Hunt actually talk in an interview
this morning.
Yeah, I was like, I was amazed and shocked on how similar they sound.
Yeah.
And just like their mannerisms. Like, I didn't give him as much credit because I thought it was just like him.
Subtle.
Yeah. But wow, he did a phenomenal job acting in that movie. I just didn't even realize.
What I know is he nails the specific English accent James Hunt has. And then also there's a certain timing to how he talks.
His cadence.
Yeah.
His cadence that Chris Hemsworth, and you don't even notice it because you just kind of.
It's so believable.
Because it's so subtle, you just kind of think, it looks so effortless. It's just like, oh, Chris Hemsworth's just kind of being Chris Hemsworth. But it's actually, no, he's doing these really subtle things to turn into that guy. It's just kind of outshined by Daniel Brühl, who is just going through this insane transformation with prosthetics.
They're both so great. Well, I can maybe do a pretty good Austrian accent speaking in German. I don't even know how I would do one speaking in English.
I kept trying to do it. I'm not terrible with impressions, and I kept trying to do it. I can't do an Austrian in English.
It's not even just that. The expressions he uses when he's speaking in German, there's one sentence where he says, "Sehe ich jetzt aus wie ein Rennfahrer?" Where he speaks High German, same as us, we would have said wie ein Rennfahrer. And he makes a point of doing it very, very Austrian way of saying that and using Austrian expressions. And I also checked in with Marie, who was on our episode for Animal Farm, who is Austrian, and she hadn't seen the movie, but from all the scenes she saw, she gave it her Austrian seal of approval for Daniel Brühl's acting in this, which, yeah, it's just incredible. And also when we watched Goodbye Lenin, we talked about the fact that his Berlin accent really kind of comes and goes. So to see him grow as an actor so much and I
don't know that he's ever going to be one of these A-list actors, but at this point, I feel like he's the most underrated actor in Hollywood because you can plug him in anywhere.
Well, I think he's a character actor. I feel like he's a character actor, and right now
'cause I
that's
feel like character actors have kind of a shtick they do, right? Like that's their character.
No, take
No, Christian Bale's a character actor.
I
Christian
guess.
Bale's a star.
Okay.
And that's just right now is actually being allowed to be somewhat a leading role, which in the past it never was a leading
That's
role. It was
true.
always like a side character that, got to play that.
Really?
But yeah,
Kind
character
of,
actors were
yeah.
not really like a thing until recently.
Well,
I feel like
De
that's
Niro
more.
kind of pioneered that whole thing, right?
Okay.
A
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like character actors have been.
I'm
A-list
saying that
role.
it's not always been the case, and it's becoming more and more prevalent for those character
guess.
actors to take bigger roles.
Well, and also Daniel Boer speaks like 5 languages. You can see that in something like Inglourious Bastards. His French is perfect, his German is perfect, his English is perfect.
He's
Like-
insane, and I mean, we grew up with him in Germany because he was in all these German movies, and he kind of just popped into Hollywood out of nowhere. That's why I feel like a lot of people still don't know him because he just kind of showed up out of nowhere. You didn't have that progression of like, okay, he was, he played so and so in a Marvel movie. And then they gave him like a leading
God, yeah.
movie,
God,
right? There isn't that progression of you kind of get to know this person, you see them going through the ranks. He just kind of shows up in Hollywood all of a sudden. He showed up in, what was it, the Captain America movie out of nowhere, like he's the villain. I'm like, wait, what? What's Daniel Blue doing here? Like, all of a sudden he's in all these side parts in Hollywood, and
Yeah, good for him.
No, it is
Yeah.
good for him, but it also makes it tough when the general public doesn't kind of see you come up. One thing that's such a stark contrast between the two movies is just Ron Howard. He makes a movie about F1, which Americans aren't really that familiar with. It takes place mostly in Europe, and the movie to me feels very European because it's just there's just nudity in the movie that you wouldn't see in a Hollywood movie.
Oh, that's true.
Right?
Americans hate nudity.
You
for some
see
reason,
Chris
yeah.
Hemsworth's butt cheeks, and there's like boobs 3 times. It feels very much like a European style movie, even though Ron Howard's like a big American director. It doesn't feel like other stuff he's made, and just the way things are filmed with the drugs and the nudity. To me, it's maybe one of the reasons it didn't do so well here. It's just there's a certain kind of commercial feel to it that's just not there. It just feels like it feels like a semi-independent movie almost. I don't know.
It did get nominated for a bunch of awards over in Europe.
Right.
But also I think the movie to me has more of an artistic feel to it.
It does,
Where I really like looking at it. Whereas in Ford versus Ferrari, I couldn't really say there's a lot of shots where I'm like, oh my God, that really blew me away.
Right.
Or like...
It's like one of Ron Howard's best movies, but like top 5. It's got to be. Like he did such a good job with this. And I wonder, maybe it is a little bit smaller budget because he wanted to like see his vision through. Maybe he didn't want to make this giant big Hollywood blockbuster where he can't do everything he wants to. There's a great shot right before Chris Hemsworth gets divorced and he's kind of going off the rails. He just lost his F1 team, right? He doesn't have a team to drive for, and he's all alone in the house getting drunk, doing drugs, like racing little toy cars. And there's this angled 45 degree shot from the vinyl, and the vinyl is in focus, and Chris Hemsworth and the whole room is out of focus, and you can just sort of tell what he's doing. And it does that shot a couple different times throughout that whole scene, and it's shots like that, and just the way I already said this earlier, the way it shoots some of the racing from like really low on the ground. Like, there's some really just great shots in this movie. Mm-hmm. And you're right, Ford versus Ferrari doesn't.
No, it definitely comes off more
feels a little bit more.
Hollywoodized.
Yeah, it just feels a little more cookie cutter.
Yeah, it's very Hollywood, very blockbuster.
Like I would see Ford Ferrari again tomorrow. Like I had a good time watching.
Yeah, no, it's a great movie.
I wanted to make a note of some really interesting script writing choices. The scene where they vote on if they should race in the Nürburgring. In actuality, Lauda only lost by 1 vote, so a lot of people were really scared. I think it's a really great movie-making thing to give him only a few votes and then have Chris Hunt say, sometimes it helps to have people like you. I think that's a really interesting and smart decision that you can't always represent reality.
No, totally. And like, where James Hunt in the Spanish Grand Prix gets disqualified and makes it look like Niki Lauda ratted him out, like that his wheelbase is too long. I couldn't find any evidence of that. No. It was just, the regulators will like just randomly pick out cars after a race and make sure they're illegal.
There was like an issue with like the New England Grand Prix where Niki Lauda's team did challenge the race because he won after going off of a like cutting through to get through and that got overturned. But that actual scene didn't happen.
And the thing is, I'm totally okay with that because it builds on their relationship in the movie, and I think when you take liberties in the movie, it should help the movie in some way, right? Build the characters or the story. And the problem with Ford Ferrari is at some points is it takes liberties that don't lead anywhere, like the scene in the warehouse where Ford is just yelling at the workers, right? If you're going to take liberties on a story, like it should sort of have a point, no?
I feel like not only that, but like liberties in a story, if they're going to take it, it should summarize like a longer period of time, you know, like the scene that we talked about earlier with how they first met. Like you get so much of their relationship in one scene that would have taken 10 scenes to build. That's the kind of stuff that it should take liberations on, you to move the movie forward and through a time lapse that you're not allowed to show because you're trying to make the movie 2 hours versus 4.
There's also so many great little details in Rush. So I already mentioned in the beginning of the movie, there's all these different languages being spoken, talking about the condition of the race, which was a big deal. And then I think it's the first shot you see, it's Niki Lauda, he's kind of narrating, and then you see him in the Ferrari, and one guy comes up to him, he's like, well, this, so-and-so, that driver, he's changing his tires. Do you want to change yours? And he looks over at Hunt. He's like, well, is Hunt changing his tires? The guy's like, no. And then Nicola's like, then we won't change our tires either. Then later on, when you come back to the beginning of that race, which is kind of the center of the story where the crash happens, you see it from Hunt's perspective, and a guy comes up to him and he's like, so-and-so's changed his tires. Do you want to change yours? And he goes, well, is Lauda changing his tires? And I won't either. It's like the same scene, but opposite each other. It's just there's little details like that I didn't notice that on. Yeah,
it's a smart movie.
It is. It's very smart. All these great little details really add up.
Another thing that is just a little fact: the race in Japan where Niki Lauda then pulls over to be with his wife. Keeping the wife there, I think, is also really great because after the crash, she asked him to retire and she never went back to one of his races, which I support, and I would have done the same thing. I would have been like, why are you still doing this? Yeah. Keeping her in the movie is really smart. And then also, there was about 4 other drivers who also pulled over because the race was too dangerous for them, which isn't shown in the movie, and you don't have to, but I thought it was just interesting. And even the interviews you guys watched this morning, they always ask about how do you feel about you could die at any moment.
Such a big thing there, then, it was so dangerous. Totally.
It's crazy. And I mean, when Niki Lauda died, I think he died at age 70 when we talked about it.
I think he was exactly 70, yeah.
He had 2 kidney transplants and a lung transplant. And I mean, his body was just breaking down, and it was such a lucky thing just to have him for all those years because, man. But he said that when they pump his lungs out, I didn't even think about this. Yeah. So what happens is your lungs are in a vacuum, so they can't pump in air, so you can't breathe while they suck out your lungs, and you go into like a panic. So from what I read is they didn't want to put him in any kind of, give him anesthesia, because as soon as he would fall asleep, they weren't sure if he was going to wake up again.
Interesting.
Which I can't even imagine, like not being able to breathe and like pumping out your lungs.
The whole thing with him in the hospital after the crash is brutal, and every time that he like puts the helmet back on, like I get emotional every time.
Auf, Niki!
Such a great scene. And I can't believe you didn't mention this yet. The music in Rush is...
The theme is really good that Hans Zimmer made for it.
I always forget Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer's the guy, the music just works just really... It's fantastic. It just adds so much, and it's always like the right music at the right time. It's nothing too crazy like when you're watching a certain Western movie, maybe. We just saw Tombstone with Tubby for the first time, and the music, I didn't remember how ridiculous the music.
A great movie. Anybody else have any more thoughts about any of these movies?
Well, I definitely feel like Rush was just such a perfect movie. Like there wasn't anything I would really trim from it, and going back and watching Ford versus Ferrari out of the theater, like there's definitely some things that they're both great movies, but there's definitely some things that I saw through the movie that I was like, okay, maybe this isn't as great as I thought the first time I saw it.
But do you still think that Rush maybe needs a little bit more explaining and exposition, or by the end of the movie you kind of got what was happening?
No, I got what was happening. Okay. There was no point during that movie where I was like, I don't understand what's going on. Even in the very beginning when I didn't grow up knowing anything about it, they did such a good job of explaining everything that like I really never felt like I was behind because of it. Which, seeing your reaction to Ford versus Ferrari, like I could see how you would feel like that because they didn't really explain it, but I had already known all that stuff. So it was like, to me, it was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. But seeing it from a different perspective, it was interesting.
I think it is a better movie, but I'm also biased towards Rush because, I grew up with Niki Lauda being on TV all the time. So, I'm going to be more interested in F1 and that story than Chevy and Ford.
I think that's different too, though, because it's not Ford versus Chevy, it's Ford versus Ferrari. And that storyline I didn't really know as much about, but I could see, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I knew that it was like American cars versus European cars. And that was more of where I knew a little bit about it.
No, I like both movies a lot. I think they're the best. They're probably the best two racing movies to come out in like the last. Well, when did Rush come out? 2013. Yeah, like in the last 10 years, I would say. Like Rush, I wouldn't want to watch every day though, because I feel like the impact of some of the emotional scenes. Like it's just a heavier, just a way heavier movie for me. I think it's a better movie, but I would only want to see it once in a while, just because it is like a lot. Where Ford versus Ferrari, I feel like you just put that on any day of the week and kind of, pop some popcorn, and it's just more of like a, again, not to call it cookie cutter, but it's just more of like, okay,
no
it's like a fun little movie. Yeah, like bones sticking out. Yeah. I think they're both very different movies, but I both like them a lot. The only thing is, if you like kind of racing movies, like I suggested this to you, and I think it's on Netflix right now. The documentary called Senna, which was about Ayrton Senna.
It's phenomenal.
Which I want to say he started racing right around the time Niki Lauda was retiring, I think. Because if you watch Rush and you see those driver meetings and they're worried about the safety of the course, there's real footage of that kind of stuff in Senna, and you really get an insight of how that works. And the way Ayrton Senna died is he died on the racetrack. I haven't seen the movie in a while, the documentary. I want to say it was right after, though. He did a vote like Niki Lauda did in the movie, and he's like, there's certain parts of this track that are just so unsafe. And then he ended up, he crashed and actually died on that racetrack then shortly thereafter. It is a thing that totally happens. And it's so much safer now than it was before. But it's crazy that these drivers almost had to like unionize and protect themselves and take these votes. Like the people in F1 and the people owning the race cars, they weren't like watching out for these drivers.
No, they want their money.
It's just crazy how far we've come.
I think that's it.
Both good stuff. You wanna lead us out, Tabby? Where can people find us?
On Instagram and Twitter at Modern Life Pod. You can check out our website, modernlifepodcast.com, and you can email us at modernlifepod@gmail.com.
Yeah, that's it. See you guys soon.
All right, darling.
Yes, love?
Get a fizzy pop, please.
Yes, love. You want one too, Shelby?
No.
Oh, yes, please,
no.
Marley.
No. He can get his own. Just for me, please.